like to discuss an example in industry, specifically with automakers, of how accounting has trade-offs between decision making and control. So to start with, we have the Model T, right? There was named the car of the century because it really made a huge shift in efficiency and innovation. It wasn't the first car that used assembly lines, but it used them far more efficiently than anyone else and was able to reduce the price of the car to a cost point where the average middle class person was able to afford one. We typically think of the auto industry along those lines. They're known for that efficiency and that innovation. But that's not always the case. And sometimes they try and innovate in areas where perhaps they shouldn't. In 2005 and 2006, leading up to the Great Recession in America, there were some accounting innovations being used by automakers, many of them, that led to some big problems. There was excessive production going on. Basically, they were making more cars than they could sell. And there were very good reasons for that. The shareholders and the upper management had imposed incentives upon their managers, saying that they wanted the average cost of vehicles to be low, and managers were given bonuses for dropping the average cost of vehicles. In the auto industry, there are extremely large fixed costs. All their plants and machinery, assembly lines, those all cost a lot of money. Their labor costs are also somewhat fixed due to union contracts. They don't have as much flexibility as you might expect in the number of hours available. And that leads to extremely limited options for optimizing that average cost per vehicle. So they did the legal accounting practice of absorption costing, which means that they were attempting to absorb the cost of their extra production onto their balance sheets and avoid listing it as an expense. That is legal and works, and it makes your shareholders very happy in the short term, makes your average cost of vehicles go down because you're producing so many vehicles. The problem is what happens when you can't sell those vehicles. For instance, the Great Recession hits. There are a lot of downsides to too much inventory. One of those costs is increases in advertising. You need to generate demand to sell all those cars. So you have to pay more on advertising. There are holding costs involved. You can't just stick a car on a shelf somewhere. You have to have lots for them. You have to have places for them. You have to protect them. That's all very expensive. There's also, associated with the advertising costs, there's also brand imaging impact. If you are giving rebates on your cars or constantly having sales, people are going to notice that, and they might think maybe that company's struggling to sell their vehicles. Some studies show that as the cars go on sale, the demand for the car actually drops by some fraction. It goes up as well, of course, but the value dollar for dollar is not as you'd expect from supply and demand. People actually think that the car is worth less because it's being advertised so heavily. So as you've got the increases in advertising and holding costs, you've got decreases in brand image and demand, you're really setting yourself up for significant problems. And this all goes back to kind of the accounting incentives that were set up for the managers. We've got two real things we're trying to do with accounting. We've got decision making and control. The numbers, the figures that you collect can be used to make good decisions for the company by your managers, or they can be used to control what your managers are doing. In this case, they were erroring too far on the control side, trying to incentivize all their managers to make those short-term profits. And that neglected the decision-making and the long-term effects of making the decisions that would be good for the company in the long term. They also failed to account for the qualitative values. There are things like goodwill that are very difficult to measure, and you can't find them on the balance sheet. You can't tell how respected your company is on that balance sheet. But those things do have real value, and they do make an impact. So you don't want your managers looking only at numbers when they're making those decisions. So really what we need is to make a distinction for you and your business between managerial accounting, which is the decision-making accounting, figuring out what information is going to help you make the best decisions for your business, and the financial reporting. Those are the numbers that the shareholders love to look at, but if you rely on those for your decision-making, you're going to run into problems.